Britain, the fifth largest economy in the world. A country that once ruled a quarter of the Earth's surface. The nation that gave the world the Industrial Revolution, parliamentary democracy, and modern banking. But today, Britain finds itself trapped in a political and economic crisis with no easy way out. 10 years to the day after the Brexit vote, Britain is about to get its seventh prime minister in a single decade. On June 22, 2026, Keir Starmer stood outside 10 Downing Street and announced his resignation. Less than 2 years after winning a historic landslide election with 411 seats, Starmer's net approval rating had fallen to -46% by November 2025, one of the worst approval ratings of any British Prime Minister on record. What had happened? In May 2026, local elections across England and Wales delivered a devastating result. Labour lost control of 35 councils and nearly 1,500 councillors in a single night. Reform UK, the hard-right populist party led by Nigel Farage, surged. In Wales, a century of Labour dominance ended when Plaid Cymru became the largest party. The political map of Britain was being torn apart. And the Britain has been trapped in a cycle of economic and political shocks for nearly 20 years now. And 3 numbers tell you everything you need to know. Number 1, growth. UK GDP grew just 1% in 2024 and 1.3% in 2025. The OECD forecasts only 0.9% growth for 2026. The US grew 15.1% above pre-pandemic levels by Q1 2026. Britain grew 6%. Number 2. UK public sector net debt hit about 95% of GDP at end of May 2026, a level not seen since the early 1960s. In cash terms, that is £2.984 trillion, rising at £4,186 every single second. And number 3, productivity. UK labour productivity growth averaged around 2% per year before 2008. Since the financial crisis, it has grown at a fraction of that pace. In Q4 2025, productivity actually fell 0.5% year-on-year. To understand why Britain is where it is today, you have to go back to 2008. In September 2008, the global financial system collapsed. Lehman Brothers fell. Banks stopped lending. In Britain, the government had to step in and bail out major banks, including Royal Bank of Scotland and Halifax, at a cost of hundreds of billions of pounds. Britain was hit hard. It had built its economy around banking and financial services, and when finance collapsed, there was nothing underneath to break the fall. Before the 2008 financial crisis, the UK's national debt was just 35% of GDP. By 2010, it had almost doubled to 67%. After the COVID-19 pandemic, it climbed above 100% in 2021. By May 2026, it stood at around 95% of GDP. The Conservative government that came to power in 2010 decided the way to fix this was through austerity, cutting public spending sharply to bring the deficit down. For the next decade, almost every part of British public life took a hit. The NHS saw its budget grow more slowly than at any point in its history. Local councils lost 40 to 50% of their government funding. Housing budgets were slashed. Social care was gutted. Youth services closed. Libraries shut. Post-2010 austerity policies led to a 60% reduction in capital investment for new affordable social homes. And here is the bitter irony. After 10 years of cuts, Britain's debt was higher than when austerity started. They destroyed public services, and the debt went up anyway. Then in 2016, Britain voted by 52% to 48% to leave the European Union. For 4 decades, British businesses had operated inside the EU single market. Goods moved freely. Workers moved freely. Companies had guaranteed access to more than 450 million customers across Europe with no extra paperwork or tariffs. Leaving that arrangement brought immediate consequences. Trade barriers at the border. Mountains of new paperwork. Products held up at customs. Small exporters simply giving up on European markets. The Bank of England has estimated Brexit reduced UK long-run economic output by around 4%. On a £3 trillion economy, that is an enormous and permanent loss. Brexit also caused labour shortages in agriculture, hospitality, and logistics as EU workers left. And politically, Brexit destroyed the governing system. Britain went through 6 prime ministers in 10 years. Every one of them consumed by Brexit's aftermath. The combined Labour and Conservative vote share in 2026 local elections reached its lowest level in over a century. National polls now show a near 5-way split, with each party competing for roughly 20% of the vote. Brexit did not make Britain great again. It made Britain ungovernable. One of the worst economic problems that followed, alongside the financial crisis and Brexit, is the country's productivity crisis. Productivity simply means how much value a worker produces in an hour. When it grows, wages can rise, businesses invest more, and the government has more tax revenue to fund hospitals and schools. When it stagnates, everything gets harder. Before 2008, UK productivity was growing at around 2% per year. Then the financial crisis hit, and it basically stopped. UK multi-factor productivity in 2024 decreased by 0.6% compared to 2023, and was 0.7% below its 2019 level. This contrasts with trend growth of around 1.8% per year in the decade before 2008. In Q4 2025, UK labour productivity actually fell 0.5% compared to a year earlier. UK GDP per hour worked ranked 4th in the G7, ahead of Japan but behind the US, France, and Germany. But the gap with the leaders has been widening since 2008. The reason is not laziness. It is lack of investment. British businesses, uncertain after 2008, then Brexit, then COVID, then energy shocks, have consistently invested less per worker than their counterparts in Germany, France, or the United States. If British productivity had kept growing at its pre-2008 rate, the average British worker would be producing around 25% more per hour today. That gap represents wages never earned, tax revenue never collected, and living standards never improved. Alongside the productivity problem is a related one. Britain simply does not invest enough in itself. Between 2010 and 2019, the UK had one of the lowest rates of public investment of any major developed economy. Roads, railways, hospitals, schools, broadband, all were left to deteriorate while other countries moved ahead. The result is visible everywhere. Britain's roads have more potholes than at any point in recorded history. Its rail network is among the most expensive in Europe. Water infrastructure is so old that water companies lose a quarter of all water to leaks every single day. Private investment is also weak. After Brexit, many multinational companies that had used Britain as their European gateway quietly shifted operations to Ireland, Germany, or the Netherlands. The investment that should have modernized British factories and offices simply never arrived. You cannot grow a modern economy on the back of declining infrastructure and rising debt. Britain has been trying to do exactly that for 15 years. All of this, the debt, the low growth, the underinvestment, shows up in the lives of ordinary British people every single day. Between October 2025 and January 2026, 88% of British adults said the cost of living was an important issue. 62% said their cost of living had increased compared to the month before. 1 in 30 adults said they had run out of food in the previous 2 weeks. In October 2022, UK inflation hit 11.1%, the highest in 40 years. The energy price cap alone was raised by 54% in 2022. Gas and electricity bills doubled for millions of families in a single year. People were choosing between heating their home and feeding their children. That phrase, heating or eating, became part of everyday British conversation. The government spent around £40 billion subsidizing energy bills to shield households. But it added that directly to the national debt. UK CPI inflation was 2.8% in April 2026, but this followed 3.3% in March, and the Bank of England warns inflation will rise again in the second half of 2026 due to energy prices linked to the Middle East conflict. There is no better single symbol of Britain's failure than its housing market. Average UK house price as of October 2025, £270,200. Cost relative to salary for a first-time buyer, 5.9 times annual income. Over the past 50 years, UK house prices rose 2,300%. Wages rose 1,400%. Britain is not building enough homes. It needs 300,000 new ones every year. Between April 2024 and September 2025, it built around 231,000. It has not hit the annual target in decades. The result is that a whole generation of British people in their 20s and 30s, have simply given up on ever owning a home. They rent, often at prices that take up 40 or 50% of their income, for properties owned by older landlords whose own houses rose in value without them doing anything at all. Over 130,000 households are currently living in temporary accommodation in England, a 156% increase since 2010. Poor housing also hits the NHS. The Building Research Establishment estimates that substandard, cold homes cost the NHS in England £1.4 billion every year through respiratory illness, cardiovascular disease, and mental health problems caused by living in cold, damp conditions. Post-2010 austerity policies led to a 60% cut in capital investment for affordable housing. Social housing fell from 20% of housing stock in 2000 to around 16% by 2023. Britain is a country where the generation that built the NHS can own a home, and their grandchildren cannot. That is not a housing problem. That is a failure of a society. The National Health Service, free healthcare for everyone at the point of use, is Britain's most loved institution. It is also the one under the most pressure. NHS waiting lists in England ballooned after COVID and have never recovered. At their peak, over 7 million people were waiting for treatment. As of early 2026, that number is still historically high. The problem is not just the pandemic. It is 15 years of underfunding. During the austerity years, NHS budgets grew more slowly than demand. 88% of British adults said the NHS was an important issue facing the UK in late 2025, up from 80% in October 2025. 64% said the government was managing the NHS badly. The NHS and the housing crisis are deeply linked. Thousands of patients who are medically well enough to leave hospital cannot be discharged because there is nowhere suitable and affordable for them to live. They stay in hospital beds at great expense, while people who actually need those beds wait in corridors. Britain is spending money keeping people in hospital beds it cannot afford because it failed to build homes it should have built decades ago. One failure feeds the next. So why does Britain keep failing to fix itself? The problems are not new. Every government for 20 years has promised to fix the NHS, build more homes, grow the economy, raise wages. None of them have delivered. There are 4 structural reasons why this keeps happening. First, short-term politics. British elections happen every 5 years. Building enough homes takes 20 years. Fixing the NHS takes a decade of consistent investment. No government wants to start something that the next government will get the credit for finishing. Britain has an electoral system built for 2 dominant parties, but a country that now has 5 or 6 major political forces. The result is that no one wins a mandate to do the hard things. Everyone wins a mandate to promise them. Second, the London effect. London is a genuinely world-class city. Its GDP, financial sector, and property market are so large that they pull up the national averages. But strip London out and large parts of the Midlands, the north of England, and Wales look like struggling parts of Eastern Europe, not like wealthy Western economies. The gap in living standards between London and the northeast of England was approximately £2,140 per household in 2019-20. That gap has been growing. Third, Britain stopped making things. After the deindustrialization of the 1980s, it never rebuilt a manufacturing base to replace what was lost. Germany, France, and Japan all retained strong industrial sectors that still export goods the world wants to buy. Britain bet everything on finance, and finance is fragile. A country that does not make things is always one financial crisis away from disaster. Britain found that out in 2008, and it has been paying for it ever since. Fourth, vested interests block change. Fixing housing means building on land that wealthy, politically active homeowners do not want touched. Raising taxes on wealth faces enormous resistance from the press and the financial sector. Resetting the trade relationship with Europe means admitting Brexit caused damage, which neither party wants to say out loud. It would be dishonest to say Britain is finished. It is not. It still has world-class universities, a creative economy, in film, music, gaming, fashion, admired across the globe, a legal and financial infrastructure that other countries still model themselves on. Enormous potential in clean energy, and a workforce that, given the right conditions, is more than capable. The new government, whoever leads it, has some genuine opportunities. Britain's offshore wind capacity is among the best in the world. A serious house-building program, if actually executed, could begin to reduce the housing crisis within a decade. A reset of the trade relationship with Europe could start to repair the damage Brexit did to exports. But all of that requires something British politics has not managed in a very long time. Britain has done this before. In 1945, it was broke, bombed, and exhausted. And it built the NHS, created the welfare state, built over 1 million new homes, and rebuilt an entire society from rubble. It took 20 years. It required political will, public sacrifice, and a shared sense of purpose. The only question that matters right now, is whether this generation of leaders and this generation of voters can find that same will. Or whether Britain keeps choosing the short-term comfort of blaming someone else over the long-term work of fixing itself.